Hey guys, it's the holiday season, and my social feeds have been full of yummy goodies. I got it in my head to attempt making royal icing. Let's give it a try. Here's the recipe I found online for the cookies. I made the dough the night before, and then I let it chill in the fridge overnight. The next morning, I went ahead and rolled it out as evenly as I could, and then just used some cookie cutters to get the shapes I was looking for. I definitely could have put more time into rolling it out evenly, which resulted in some of the cookies being thicker and some being thinner. But overall, it was a good recipe, and I'll use it again. Here's the recipe I used for the icing. The first batch turned out a little thick, and when I added the gel food coloring, it got a little thicker, but it worked. The second batch was pretty good. But then I made a big mistake, and I left all of the icing out uncovered on the counter while I was sick for 2 days. So here's some footage of me trying to recover that icing. It took a lot of elbow grease and some warm water, but I did eventually get something usable out of it. I started off by trying to use the technique I had seen online where you use icing to make a border, and then you fill that border up with the rest of the icing, and then use a tool if needed to make sure that it floods evenly. It did work out okay, but then my white icing was not the right consistency. It was a little too thick inside the bag, so it didn't end up giving me the stripes I was looking for, so I had to swirl those in a bit and make more of a flocked tree look. And then I just added some yellow twinkle lights. For the rest of the cookies, I decided that I wasn't going to try the border, and I was just going to add some icing onto the cookie and use a toothpick to get the shape I was looking for. I tried the border method again on the final cookie when the consistency had gotten a little more even, and it did work pretty well that time. Honestly, the hardest part of decorating the cookies was deciding what I wanted to do for detail work. I tried some stripes, I tried to make little ornaments on this one tree, but the piping bag had more of a ribbon coming out than a circle, and so those didn't come out super great. I really struggled with the consistency of the white icing in this bag. It starts off really runny, and then this blue icing came out way too runny at first, so it ruined the little lines I was doing, and I just had to thicken those up to make it look even across the cookie. The holly leaves were probably the easiest to do. The green icing overall did what I wanted it to do, and the red had gotten to a nice warm consistency at this point, so it was really easy to make the berries. The stars probably seem like the easiest cookie to do, but this yellow icing was the bane of my existence. It was one of the icings that had sat out fully uncovered on the counter, so I had to put a lot of work in before I could even start icing to get it to a consistency I could use. And I probably could have spent a little more time working on it because I ended up having some crystallized sugar in the bag that I ended up having to work out of the tip all the time. So any yellow icing took a lot longer than I thought. But then the red icing worked out just fine, and I just had to push it to the edges a little bit. The ornaments were really fun to decorate, but they were really hard at first because I had to decide how I wanted to decorate them. I started off by just doing the little caps, and then I used the white to make a border around this cookie and gave it some time to harden. The green cookie made me realize why people invest in all of the different tools because it gets you those fine details you're looking for. I went back to the white cookie and tried to flood in that border and then make a peppermint tree. I think the tree turned out pretty good. It was pretty easy. You just have to make a little blob and then pull it with the toothpick or the tip of the piping bag. But then the white started to leak over, so I had to put it on a little toothpick support. Overall, at this point, the icings, except for the yellow, were at the consistency I wanted them at, so I could do the wet on wet look for most of these cookies, and it was really successful. I wanted to try a wet on dry look with the orange cookie, so I filled it in just orange at first, and then I came back to it later. The snowflakes were pretty basic to do. I didn't have quite enough icing to flood them all, so I decided to play around with the different designs a snowflake can have. So I did some with flooding and some with line work and a little bit of flooding, and then some just line work and outlines. And then I wanted to do some blue snowflakes as well, but the blue was a bit runny of a consistency. As you can see, it flooded over the edge of that one cookie, but we were able to pull it back. The orange ornament had dried by this point, so I was able to add the scalloped white decoration on it, and I think it turned out really good. By the time I got around to these circle cookies, I was at the last of my icing, and so I was just having fun. My husband decided to give it a try and make some shapes with that black icing, so I turned it into a little bit of a gaming controller. And the rest of these cookies, I was just using up all of the icing in any way I could, so I decided to go with some little funky, different designs and just work on my piping skills. Okay, so overall the trees turned out pretty good. I was able to get some definition with the different types of icing with the wet on dry. The holly leaves, I ended up having some different consistencies with the green. Some were more smooth and some had more of a frosting consistency. And then I had inconsistencies with the bake on this because of the thickness of the dough. The stars turned out looking pretty uniform. I do think that yellow looks a little bit like mac and cheese yellow, but they overall had about the same thickness and consistency. The ornaments were some of my favorite just because I was able to get the right consistencies between the different icings, and so I was able to have a bit more control over what they looked like, whether it was wet on wet or wet on dry. And overall, there was very little spread when it came to the dough on the ornaments, and they were all about the same size. The snowflakes all turned out pretty good, but there ended up being quite a bit of spread in the detail of those grooves in between each of the corners of the snowflake. And then the circles didn't have too much spread, but there was a little bit since it was the end of the dough. I do think that snowman turned out really well since the wet on wet was so successful by that point. I wasn't actually able to film myself icing these snowmen, which is a disappointment because I think I did a pretty good job on them. They had the least amount of inconsistency with the dough thickness. I also wasn't able to film the stockings, which was a disappointment because I think I did a really good job on the icing of them, but there was quite a bit of variability between the thicknesses of the dough. These are my favorites of each of the cookies. And overall, I think I did a pretty good job on this. Obviously, I dropped the ball on the icing thickness, but what can you do when you get sick? Anyway, thanks so much for coming along with me and giving this a try. See you next time.